Hey, all you literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie, and welcome to another episode of BookSmart. Today's book is not quite a memoir, but sort of. It's More Please, On Food, Fat, Binging, Longing, and the Lust for Enough by Emma Specter. A few years ago, in the throes of middle age, when I went to the doctor for my annual physical, she said I had disordered eating. I didn't know what that was, but apparently disordered eating is when you aren't anorexic or bulimic or even have any sort of binge disorder. It's just this catch-all phrase when your relationship with food isn't normal. I've had issues with food all my life and even stopped eating when I was a senior in high school. So books about food issues intrigue me as I try to figure out why in the world I can't just eat like a normal person. Emma Specter is much younger than me. It seems that most of the books I've read on eating disorders are usually by writers that are older than me or just a few years younger than me. Specter is not of my generation, so I was interested to read a younger perspective on food disorders. First, I'd like to say that having crumbs of what appears to be red velvet cake on the cover only made me want red velvet cupcakes with my homemade cream cheese frosting. I have not made them yet, but they're on my list. I don't know if that was the best cover for a book about food binging. Here's what I liked about Specter's book. There's a plethora of topics in the book that revolve around binging: exercising, dieting, Weight Watchers, 12-step programs, prescriptions, drugs to combat weight loss, fat phobia, the prevalence of food disorders amongst the LGBTQ community, dating and eating. There's a little bit of everything in the book. Even though I know quite a bit about food disorders, as I've read many, many books, I learned some new stuff from Specter. Within Specter's own research, she enlightened me even more. Here's a golden nugget I found quite fascinating that Specter shared with us. So this is from Lori Colwyn, who wrote More Home Cooking. She says, "We know that without food we would die. Without fellowship, life is not worth living." Colwyn makes a passionate case for sharing food, home-cooked or store-bought, with the people in your life, and her reference to fellowship reminds me that eating in the company of loved ones isn't just an exercise in caloric absorption. It's a daily undertaking with the potential to tether us ever more tightly to the people around us. So while I know food and community and socialization all go together, it's funny how separate I've made them myself. I don't have happy memories of sitting at our dining room table when I was in junior high, mostly due to an older sister who was not very nice to me, so I dreaded supper time. Yet this fellowship may be one of the key components in addressing food issues. Specter at one point was so skinny she would be dizzy upon standing, then gained a lot of weight. She compares how she was treated as skinny versus fat and even addresses her own biases in the book. Specter provides a neat perspective of this, and here's one I'm going to share about how to deal with social situations, because we have these unspoken expectations of each other. Just because we're fat, I imagine myself self-righteously lecturing a horde of my fellow oversized 18 beauties in some conference room somewhere, does not mean we owe the thin people in our lives dry salads and performative self-hatred and no thanks, I'm on another diet demurrals. We do not have to eat or not eat in the way they expect us to. We don't have to be afraid just because they are. Well stated. She also reminds us that weight is just one aspect of health, that bigger people may actually be more active than smaller people, that our weight and appearance does not reveal everything about us. Specter's book was a relatively quick read, which is okay, but I would have preferred more memoir than interviews, which leads me to what I didn't like about the book. Part of this is my own fault. On the book jacket, it states, and I quote, "Melding memoir, reportage, and in-depth interviews with some of the most prominent and knowledgeable commentators currently writing about food, fatness, and disordered eating, Emma Specter explores binge eating disorder as both a personal problem and a societal one." So I should have considered that more closely before I purchased the book, because I really didn't like the style. A book I did recently, Committed, melds experience with research and literary examples and does so seamlessly. It all just kind of comes together. Specter, not so much. I adored her memoir parts as they were authentic and funny and sad and relatable and informative. Then the narrative just sort of stops and she introduces her other information like a student research paper. When I interviewed so-and-so, I hated that style. It was choppy and it pulled me out of the book, and those segments went on for way too long, sometimes about ideas that didn't always fit with the rest of the chapter. I was familiar with a few of these sources she used, Leslie Jameson and Roxane Gay, but the information was too distracting from Specter's own story, which I felt was strong enough to stand on its own. I don't know why she didn't write a memoir and focus on that, because even the subtitle suggests that the book is covering too much: food, fat, binging, longing, and the lust for enough. It didn't all come together for me, largely because so much of the book contained interview information. However, it was worth the read, and while I would have been much happier had I found this at a used bookstore and not used my Barnes & Noble rewards on this book, I did take some very useful information with me. Here's one that I think, especially at my age, is sometimes difficult to reconcile, which I think we've all been there in some way, shape, or form, whether it relates to food or not. Although it's taken me a long time and a lot of therapy, I can finally admit that the thing I'm proudest of in my life isn't my job or occasionally seeing my byline in print or any other professional accomplishment. It's coming into compassion for the former versions of me, not just the mid-20s baby dyke and newbie journalist, but also the sad girl who sat in her bedroom in LA and ate to quell her loneliness, the deep-closeted college kid, the straight-C high school student and abandoned 8th grader, and aunt's child of divorce, who all still live inside me, guiding my decision and shaping my emotional responses. I'm doing my best to heed Joe Didion's famous advice to keep on nodding terms with the people we used to be, whether we find them attractive company or not. I don't find them attractive company, not always, but I'm trying to face them regardless, because I know I can't move forward until I acknowledge the many, many selves who have made me, me. Yes, we all need to give our younger selves a break, especially cut some slack for our childhood selves. And more importantly, there are some useful tips in dealing with food in the book. At my age, I even look at food and I gain weight. Here's some insight from one of Specter's sources that she talks about in her book. It's taken me years to be able to say this, but as I sound it out in my head, it feels true. I mostly like my hunger. I've grown accustomed to it, and I learn its contours every day when I wake up and try to figure out whether cereal or a big greasy breakfast burrito or a green juice or just coffee would feel best in my stomach. I try to take the advice I once got from writer and curve model Kendra Austin, who has written extensively about her own experiences living with disordered eating, to eat dessert every day, or at least to eat dessert whenever I want it, especially when I'm feeling bad about the wanting itself. When the old mental reflex to just stick some grapes in the freezer or just pick up some Halo Top goes off in my head, that's when I know I really need dessert, as an actual dessert, not diet ice cream that tastes like Splenda sweetened snow. I used to think of my hunger as something feral, out of control, an untamed animal who needed to be sedated as much as possible, lest it rise up and maul me. But now I'm trying to see it as more of a kindly invited guest, someone whose preferences and tastes I let guide me without overwhelming me entirely. I have a sweet tooth, so I always want dessert. Sometimes just eat, and sometimes just eat whatever you want. Once again, I think it comes down to that basic rule for everything in our lives, not just food, something I think Ben Franklin preached: everything in moderation. When you have food issues, it's difficult to remember something so simple. And though this is slightly off topic, I would recommend watching Karen Carpenter's Starving for Perfection, a new documentary you can rent through Prime. I've always loved Karen Carpenter, but even if you don't like the Carpenter's music or even know who she is, you should watch it if you have any sort of food disorder. Thanks to Karen Carpenter, whose untimely death at only 33 years old from complications related to her anorexia, eating disorders became more readily talked about. Her story correlates with Specter's in regards to the lust for enough. Sometimes we have to realize that enough is enough, or it will kill us. If you struggle with a food disorder, if you struggle with your weight, of course, who doesn't? If you struggle with body image or unreal expectations you place upon yourself with the help of society, More Please is a good book to read. You will learn something. There's enough takeaways in the book that will make it feel like it's worth your time. Maybe just find a used copy instead. Thanks for watching. As always, my goal of BookSmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.